In this video, I'm going to be talking about why healing the nervous system is a key factor in recovering from chronic exhaustive conditions like ME, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and long COVID. So, our autonomic nervous system controls things like our heartbeat, our digestion, our respiration, and it has an inbuilt flexibility to be able to move from a fight or flight state, which is called sympathetic state, and back into rest and digest, which is known as parasympathetic. Now, when we go into a fight or flight state, we're only meant to be in that state, pumping out stress hormones for a short period of time. And that would be to fight if we need to, or to run away. And so the blood is sent to the muscles and to parts of the body that are going to help us to do those things. But we need to move back into a rest and digest state afterwards. And some people get stuck in what's called sympathetic dominance, where they're in a fight or flight state a lot of the time. So our brain will sometimes perceive a threat when actually there isn't one. It could be the thought of something stressful that puts us into this state. And sometimes we can get stuck like that on an ongoing basis and become very hypervigilant, where our brain is scanning for danger all of the time. And what happens is the adrenals are going to be pumping out adrenaline and cortisol into the bloodstream. And that means that other systems in the body that are not required for a fight or flight state are going to be getting shut down. So our digestion isn't getting the blood flow it needs. And because a lot of our immune system is in our gut, this impairs our immune system as well, making us more susceptible to infections. And the rest of the endocrine system is also impacted because the adrenals can get very exhausted if we're constantly pumping out stress hormones. So when we're constantly pumping out cortisol into the body, our adrenals can get quite fatigued. And if you speak to your doctor about adrenal fatigue, it's likely that they won't be willing to discuss this with you. It's really a term that's used more in complementary and holistic medicine. So adrenal fatigue is what we call it when the adrenals just get really exhausted from pumping out these stress hormones. And if the adrenals are fatigued, that has a knock-on effect for the whole endocrine system. So if you're female, you might be getting a lot of symptoms with PMT or menopausal symptoms because hormonally you're all out of balance. And it can also affect other things like our blood sugar. And also, things like our blood pressure can be low because of this fight or flight state, and that can lead to conditions like POTS, for example. We can be so exhausted but not be able to sleep because our cortisol ends up being high at the end of the day when in fact it should be high at the start of the day. So some people do testing for this and they find with fatigue that they have very low cortisol in the morning. So there's this kind of day-night reversal going on because everything is just out of balance and out of kilter. And often what people do is reach out for sugar, for caffeine, to just keep going because they're so exhausted and their body just doesn't have the energy that it needs to get through the day. The other thing that can be impacted from adrenal fatigue is the thyroid gland. And again, this is this knock-on effect I was talking about. So the adrenals being exhausted mean that the thyroid has to work harder. So often there's thyroid dysfunction and it's often not picked up by standard tests in the UK NHS clinics. Sometimes we need to have a more in-depth thyroid panel to actually see that there could be thyroid imbalance going on. And as I mentioned, a lot of people with chronic fatigue and fibro and these kind of chronic exhaustive conditions will also be struggling with IBS, immune system issues, being run down all the time, and inflammation because cortisol levels are not in balance, and tense muscles, and as I mentioned, being irritable, and overstimulated all of the time. So you get this very tired but very wired state. And this is all coming from the nervous system. So it's so important to address stress and what is causing the brain to the HPA axis. I spoke about the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands to be activated on an ongoing basis, and why somebody is stuck in this sympathetic dominant state. So the way that I work with my clients is to really get to the bottom of what is going on for them in their life that is causing stress. And that can be very individual. So everybody has different stress triggers. So I work in a very holistic way. I remember when I had chronic fatigue, I would get sent to different departments to see different doctors. So one doctor for my digestive issues, one doctor for the nerve pains and numbness I was having, and another doctor for something else. And none of those doctors would speak to each other and look at me as a whole. The way that I got well was to work holistically. And that's the way that I work with my clients now. So you need to look at everything that's going on, right? So you're biologically, what's happening. So things like what's going on in the gut, and also psychologically, how are you thinking? How are you behaving? What is causing the stress for you? A lot of the time it's the way we're thinking about things, but there's also, you know, often real stress is going on in people's lives, but looking at how you can respond to those situations in a different way can be really helpful for lowering stress. And how are we feeling about where we work, about family, about our relationships? There's so many different ways to look at stress. And how are you going about your day? Are you pushing yourself really hard? Are you driving yourself really hard? And just, really kind of keeping that adrenal stress going. So we need to be looking at slowing down. We need to be looking at finding the individual stress triggers. And that's why it's great to work with a practitioner who can really help you to identify those things, because sometimes they're playing out very subconsciously and we're not always aware ourselves of what those stresses are. So I work with things like mindfulness, meditation, breath work, slowing down. Yoga was a really helpful part of my recovery, and really getting to the bottom of what is causing the stress. It's often been prolonged stress. Sometimes there are adverse childhood experiences and trauma that need looking at, or perhaps a grief or bereavement, or just an ongoing chronic stress situation at work, at home. So many different things. So it's really being a bit of a health detective and finding out what those things are, and then starting to look at how we can calm that nervous system right down. And that is a really big part of the recovery journey. And just over time, you will find that your symptoms will start to fall away as your nervous system calms. We need to be in parasympathetic state so that we can heal, so that we can rest. And again, it's really important to look at, if you're resting, what kind of rest are you getting? Are you lying down and resting, but actually your mind is racing? So you can be in fight or flight, just lying on the bed, or even in bed at night, with your mind racing with all kinds of worries. So this is so important to look at. Anyway, I've written a blog about this. I will put the details of that in the notes below. I hope you found this video useful. I'm going to be making a lot more videos about working with the nervous system and the holistic approach. And hopefully you'll find that really helpful. I certainly did. It was a key part of my recovery from 8 years of chronic fatigue. So I'm looking forward to sharing more with you, and I wish you a happy and healthy day ahead.